we have assembled here for the book launch. It's a Marathi translation called Asahmati's by Milin. The original book is written by Professor Romila Thapar, Voices of Dissent. I invite our Deputy Director, Julia Hoslein.
Thank you, Jayashree. A very warm welcome to the Goethe Institute, Max Müller Bhavan in Mumbai. We are happy to welcome you today to the book launch, Voices of Dissent by Romila Thapar, and the Marathi translation from Milin. You might have expected Björn Ketels, the director of the Goethe Institute. He's still unwell, that's why I'm here to cope with me. Very warm welcome to you, dear audience, and to our special guests. We are happy to welcome you today to the book launch, and I will leave the introduction to my colleague Jayashree, the head of the library.
May I request Julia to welcome Romila ji, Milin and Ranjit with a small token of gratitude. Romila ji. रोमिलाजी जेव्हा लिहितात तेव्हा परखड लिहितात, तर्ककठोर लिहितात, तरीही रंजक लिहितात, कारण त्यांच्या लिहिण्याला अभ्यासाची बैठक असते, एक चिंतन असतं त्यामागे, बऱ्याच वर्षांची तपश्चर्या आहे त्यामागे. त्यामुळे अजूनही आपल्याला पुन्हा पुन्हा त्यांना ऐकावंसं वाटतं, कारण त्या नवीन नवीन काहीतरी सांगत असतात, एक नवीन परिप्रेक्ष्य आपल्याला देत असतात. Romila Thapar, Emerita Professor of History, Jawaharlal Nehru University, General President of the Indian History Congress, Fellow of the British Academy. She holds honorary doctorates from University of Calcutta, Oxford and Chicago, among others. Honorary Fellow of Lady Margaret of Oxford. She was awarded the prestigious Kluger Prize of the US Library of Congress. I'm being very brief here. So now I'll quickly speak about the book. I mean, I'm not going to speak about the book because the author is with us, but just to give you a hint about what it contains. Voices of Dissent, आपल्याकडे जुनी परंपरा आहे भारतात सुद्धा वेदकाळापासून असहमती दाखवण्याचे सभ्य प्रयत्न झालेले आहेत. भक्ती संप्रदाय आपल्याकडे किंवा भक्तीची जी परंपरा आहे तिथे आपल्याला सगळ्यात मोठा क्रांतिकारी आवाज आपल्याला जो माहिती आहे डिसेंट, असहमतीचा, तो तुकारामांचा आहे. तर रोमिलाजी आपल्याला आता अशाच मार्गाने देणार आहेत, अगदी वेदकाळापासून ते आतापर्यंत. सो इन व्हॉइसेस ऑफ डिसेंट अँड एसे, Romila Thapar looks at the articulation of non-violent dissent and relates it to various pivotal moments throughout India's history. So the articulation of dissent does not mean a violent revolution, it is a civilized discourse on disturbing questions that need answers. That is, we will hear from her more about it. Then we have with us the translator Milin. I invite Romila ji to speak about the book, and after that I introduce Milin and we'll listen to his views about how the journey was while translating such a book, etc. So may I now invite you, Romila ji.
Thank you very much indeed for this opportunity to speak about the book. This is the first translation think, as far as I can remember. I'm getting old, so I forget these things. But it is the first translation, and I am very excited by it because I would like to know how people who are reading the non-English version will react to the book. It's not an easy book, but I certainly enjoyed writing it. So I hope that Milind enjoyed translating it. I don't know. The idea of dissent, as has been said, it isn't violent revolution. Dissent is basically disagreement, but it's a little more than disagreement. It is an expression of a different point of view. Now, why did I think many decades ago that this was important? It is really largely because I think that you cannot have, and I say this repeatedly to the point where people become bored of my saying it, you cannot have an advance in knowledge unless you question existing knowledge. However good existing knowledge may be, it's always open to question. And all advance in knowledge is dependent on the questioning of existing knowledge. And in a sense, the questioning of existing knowledge begins then with dissenting ideas. And that is why I think that dissent is a very fundamental notion, a very fundamental concept in all histories, everywhere in the world, and that we should take it much more seriously than we have, especially in the writing and thinking about our own history. Now, the centrality of this idea then has been present in Indian thought and history, has tended to be ignored by historians and thinkers who feel that, history, civilization is one flowing stream, everybody agreeing and finally ending up with something with no disagreement. And my problem was that I tended to see the disagreements. So I began to say, as an historian, how does one place these disagreements and how does one come to understand them? And I came to the conclusion that consent and dissent, agreement and disagreement, are in a sense dialectical models, they're dialectical roles, they react one on the other, and that these are very fundamental to Indian thought. Why do I say they're fundamental to Indian thought? Because if you go into the histories of Indian philosophy, you probably all heard of the little, in a sense, the advice that is given by various philosophers, that you begin with the Purva Paksha, the point of view of your opponent, which you describe with absolute clarity and honesty. Don't make fun of the point of view of the opponent. Then you present the point of view of the Pratipaksha, which is the proponent, which may be yourself. And you see the juxtaposition and the conflict or the agreement, degrees of agreement, degrees of conflict between these two views. And from that emerges what is called the Siddhanta or the solution. So the point I'm trying to make is that dissent is not what some people say it is, that, it's a Western idea. Dissent is absolutely fundamental to Indian thinking, and we have to learn to understand this fundamentality and understand why it is fundamental. So I became interested in the notion of dissent about half a century ago. It was not present times that led me to dissent. I was talking about dissent even earlier. And I began thinking about it when I studied a little bit about the history of religion. The history of religion not in terms of theology and text, but in terms of how religion is actually practiced and the role that is given to religion in society. And what are my examples of dissent? What is it that bothered me? If one takes the 5th century BC, the middle of the first millennium, There's a whole tradition of Vedic thinking and Vedic argument and Vedic religion, which is holding forth, and as far as we know, had a pretty good hold on people. But then you have the working out of what was called Vedic Brahmanism. The ritual of sacrifice, the worship of Indra and Agni when the earlier gods go into affairs, and the writings in Vedic Sanskrit, which were very, very difficult for people to understand, except for those that were highly educated in that particular language. And then around the 5th century BC, you get dissent coming in. How? In the form of what had been called the Shamana religions. Buddhism, Jainism, the Ajivatas, and some people even include the Charvak thinking, which is the thinking of the materialist philosophy. Why does one call them dissenting ideas? First of all, they all deny deity. There is no such thing as gods. So all these Vedic gods are really purposeless. The centrality of ethics is based on non-violence. So the sacrificial ritual in which animals are being sacrificed become nullified. This is not the way to worship. The texts are all written in Pali or in Prakrit, and this is the commonly spoken language which everybody understands. So there's no question of writing your texts in an esoteric Vedic Sanskrit which only the highly learned Brahmins can follow. And then comes a very important aspect of this descent, that is the centrality of what they call renunciation. Now, renunciation is very often mixed up with asceticism. Oh, you give up everything and you go away, you sit in a forest or you sit on a mountain and you meditate. But that is not the shamanic concept of renunciation. There is a difference between renunciation and asceticism, and I would like you to keep this in mind because it is very important. Renunciation is an attempt to say that you can improve society. You can improve the well-being of society not by saying, I will behave very well in my next birth, I will be born better, but you can improve it in this birth. And how can you improve it? By observing certain laws. And these are ethical laws of which ahimsa is very important. And taking care, compassion, karuna, is also extremely important. And the purpose of renunciation then, of renouncers, is that they go off into monasteries, they exclude themselves, but they have to get their food from society, so they come into towns and villages with their alms bowls, and they contact people, they talk to people, and they tell people how it is that you can create a better society. So they're not cut off completely, even though they are renouncers. Some forms of renunciation support orthodoxy, and some forms of renunciation are completely opposed to orthodoxy. But the idea is that you encourage the creation of a society which has very strong ethical values, which may be different from the values that prevail. For example, the Shramana sects do not believe in caste and the Dharma Shastras. They are somewhat hesitant about accepting that. And the centrality of ahimsa continues. It's no longer a case of if you're very hard put to it, there is evil going on in the world, you can go out and kill. No. Killing is not the answer. Ahimsa is not the answer. The answer has to come differently. Now, this kind of teaching, which I regard as the dissenting voice, as it were, mind you, like everything else, it remains dissenting up to a point, and then very soon it develops its own orthodoxy. And then it has dissenters against its own orthodoxy. And this is very typical of all such movements, even to this day. But this kind of idea is very prevalent in history between the Mauryan period and the Gupta period. That is between about the time of the Buddha, when he preaches it from 5th century BC right up to the early the 5th century AD. And it's a moot point as to whether during that period we have to concede that perhaps Buddhism was a stronger force than Brahmanism. This is debated by historians, and it's a very interesting debate, and one wishes that this debate would carry on because it has created some very interesting ideas. By the 5th century AD, there's a tendency to oust Buddhism with the rise of Brahmanism, and we then get the development, a new development, as it were, a fresh development in the Hindu religion, which some scholars refer to as Puranic Hinduism. The gods change again. It's no longer Indra and Agni which are the chief gods, it's Vishnu and Shiva, and Vishnu and Shiva remain. And to this is later on added Shakti. So you have these three attributes of divinity which are essential to Puranic Hindu. They may take different forms, the gods, but essentially it's these three gods that are very prominent. The second big departure. The gods are made into icons, anthropomorphic icons, sometimes with 2 arms, sometimes with 64 arms. But that doesn't matter. The 64 arms is another story altogether, and it's telling another story. But nevertheless, icons. Now, once you have icons, you have to house them, you have to put them somewhere. So you get the beginning of temples. The temple did not exist in the Vedic period. Icons did not exist in Vedic times or in the Vedas. They come into existence around the 3rd, 4th centuries AD. They are late. Please remember that. The language is certainly Sanskrit of Puranic Hinduism, but it's a different kind of Sanskrit. It's sort of the common language that people understood. Sanskrit, and there was a little bit of Prakrit, but they were rather conscious about status, so they wrote everything in Sanskrit. And it becomes very powerful from the 7th century onwards. And you may well ask, as historians have been asking for some time, what happened? Why did Buddhism and Jainism decline? And why did Brahmanism become so powerful? But anyway, there it is, it becomes powerful. But as I said, every religious movement, even those that begin as dissenting movements, do meet up with opposition, dissent, themselves, and their own orthodoxy. So what happens from about the 9th, 10th, 11th centuries onwards, earlier in South India, but certainly the 10th, 11th centuries in North India, there is a new movement called Bhakti, which is really opposed to both Vedic Brahmanism and Puranic Hinduism, although this is never said in so many words. But when you look at the forms of worship and how they worship and what they worship, it is a different kind of religious articulation. It's not completely unorthodox, but it is a questioning articulation. And here I'm back again to my theory about how important it is to question. Bhakti is characterized by the fact that you create your own deity and you create your own form of worship. You have the Alvars, take worship of Vishnu, for example. Just to point out the differences. The Alvars in South India, worshipping Vishnu with hymns and poems. Vitthal in Maharashtra, not worship the same way at all as the Alvars. Surdas in the Mathura, North Indian region, again, worship very differently the kinds of poetry and hymns and songs he composes. The focus is on Krishna bhakti, much more so than, for example, in Maharashtra or in South India. And then you have Kabir, who talks about, the creator was Ram and Allah. You take your choice. And you worship the way you wish to worship. You don't have to go to the temple. You don't have to go to the priest and ask for a ritual to be performed. You can quietly do it by yourself, at home, or anywhere you choose to. It's very personalized worship. So in many ways, it's a descent from Quranic Hinduism, which was taking everybody into temples and saying, now you bow down 10 times in front of this, and you put this here, and you put that there, and so on. None of this is really necessary. But please remember that when we talk about bhakti, we tend to talk about it as a single, all-pervading movement with the same characteristics. No, it is multiple categories of multiple beliefs and ways of worship which can differ one from the other, as I'm trying to suggest. And it also becomes a very interesting channel for picking up tribal deities and tribal worship and gods that normally would be regarded as marginal, if not way beyond the margin. So at this time, when bhakti is very strong, that is from about the 10th, 11th century onwards, you find a lot of tribal worship coming into Puranic Hinduism. For example, the Jagannath at Puri is very much that. Some writers have suggested that Vitthal actually began as a hero, a cattle saving hero, and his iconography goes back to hero stories that were prevalent amongst tribal people and in rural areas among villages. What I'm trying to suggest is that you have certain movements in religion which are very open and which allow all kinds of other ideas and beliefs to come in. They mingle and merge, and they either become part of the bigger religion or they move off and become a little minority religion by themselves. And this is where the importance comes in of something that we do not give importance to, which is the religion not only of those that belong to the varnas, the castes, but also those that belong to the avarna, the non-caste people. The people that we've always dismissed as being low and untouchable and unconcerned and so on, they too have a religion and they too have forms of worship. And it's very necessary to find out, even if it means going to the oral tradition today, it's very necessary to find out what half the population of this country was believing and worshipping from the beginnings of history, almost the beginnings of history to now. Okay, then comes a totally new religion, Islam. And what do we do with it? If you ask somebody generally, the popular thing is, the country split into the Hindus and the Muslims. Nothing could be further from the truth. What happens with the coming of Islam? It brings in a new concept of deity, Allah. It's very different from Varun and Mitra and Shiva and Vishnu and so on. But it's deity. The basic concept is that of deity. The rituals of worship are different. You have namaz as your prayers, you go to the mosque or whatever it may be, and the rituals performed are certainly very different. Islam arrives and it's already been split into the Sunnis and the Shias. So it's not a unified religion that comes in. And that aspect of religion is controlled by the qazis and the mullahs and the orthodoxy. It's observed by the upper caste Muslim. And I'm deliberately using this phrase and emphasizing it because there is caste in Muslim society. There is great consciousness of the difference between the upper caste Muslim, the Sayyid and the Ashraf and all of them, and the lower caste Muslim, the Ajrak and the Pasmanda, who are regarded as outside the social circle, as it were. But what happens is that at different levels, you get mixtures. For example, when a number of people come and settle down in the Hindi-speaking area, there are Muslim landowners of 2 or 3 generations who become Krishna bhakts. They worship Krishna. And in fact, one of the most famous of these was someone you might have heard of if you're at all interested in classical Indian music, Ras Khan. Ras Khan composes verses in praise of Krishna and Radha, which to this day are sung as bandishes in the Hindustani classical music tradition. And there are a number of others like that. I won't name them. It goes on. In addition to this, you have the Sufis who come in from Central Asia. They are Muslim, yes, they get converted in about the 12th century, 11th, 12th century. They come from a strong Buddhist tradition. And we always forget that all these Central Asian Turks that come have a very, very strong root in earlier Buddhism, which had gone on for centuries in Central Asia. So when they come here, you can again, like the Bhakti movement, which splits into a massive number of categories, the Sufi tradition also goes into a number of categories, some of which are quite orthodox and close to Islam, others which are totally opposed and quite different. And so when you talk about Sufism, please do ask yourself, which group of Sufis am I talking about? Because they can have very, very different beliefs and forms of worship from the other. You also get coming in the Arabs. Now we always think of the Arabs as coming in as conquerors and sin. Yes, there was a little invasion and a little conquest, which didn't go very far actually. The big impact of the Arabs was they came as traders across the Arabian Sea, and they settled down all along the west coast of India. This was not new, because in the pre-Islamic period, there were very close trading relationships between East Africa, Southern Arabia, and the west coast of India. This is all material that is coming to light now that we're interested in what is called the history of the Indian Ocean trade. And there are all groups of people that are coming and going. So suddenly this group that comes from Southern Arabia has become Muslim. They've been converted to Islam, but they come across. And what happens? They mix with the local traders down the west coast. And what emerges is a whole series of new Indo-Islamic, Hindu-Islamic religions. The Khojas, the Bohras, the Navayats, the Mapilas, these are all mixed up fellows who've really taken their religion from here and there and concocted a new way of worship. Now, the reason why I'm saying all this is because we don't understand that when people come as migrants and come and settle, they do create new cultures. And creating a new culture is not just creating a new way of life, it's creating a new religion, it's creating a new language, because they have to speak to each other, they're speaking different languages, and out of this emerges a new culture. And we then rush today to say, oh, was it Muslim or was it Hindu? The point is, it was neither. It was a mixture of the two. And we have to recognize that much of the religion in this country is a mixture of other religions. The purity of religion exists with some people, it doesn't exist with many others. And that again, we have to give a position and a place. Where does it exist as a pure religion? Where does it exist as a mixed up religion? Anyway, to move a little faster, the renouncer, coming back to the renouncer, becomes a very normal figure in Indian society. You have the Buddhist bhikkhu, you have the Jain monk, you have the holy man, the sadhu, you have the jogi, you have the peer, you have the fakir, infinite number of names for people who say, we have renounced society, we're going off on our own to find a solution to the problems that we face, both as individuals and as social beings. Dissent, therefore, is accepted amongst all these people, and the fact that they are listened to means that the audience they're addressing is also ready to receive some ideas of dissent. They may not agree entirely with the yogi and the sadhu and the peer and the fakir, but they do sit and listen to these people, and that's very major in trying to understand dissent. Of course, this runs into problems for those who want to use religion to control people and to control society. The moment religion is politicized and is used as an agency of social and political control, dissent goes out. You cannot allow dissent because political uses of religion require only one form. That form has to be fully controlled by those who are in power. It can be applied even in our times. It has continued historically. This is my thesis, that there's been no period of Indian history when there haven't been dissenting groups. And how does it come into modern society? There's one, of course, very, very obvious scene where it is present. The discussion on passive resistance in civil disobedience, what Gandhi called satyagraha, the grasping of the truth. Who does the grasping? What is the truth? That's for you to find out. No one's going to tell you. You have to discover it for yourself. And what are the features that Gandhi picks up in this way of passive resistance of civil disobedience? Renunciation. A lot of what he recommends to people in his ashrams is living the life of a renouncer, basically, not completely. I mean, celibacy is not made mandatory, but there is a tendency to say, take it easy, the way the renouncers did. And the emphasis on non-violence. That is a very important aspect. It's not that the Indian civilization made us all non-violent for centuries and centuries. We've been a very violent people. But what Indian civilization and thought did was to make us aware of the fact that you can be non-violent, that there is a contradiction between violence and non-violence, and that this is a very important part of social living. So renunciation and non-violence become essential to these modern manifestations, the kind of teaching that Gandhi produced and a few others, which is a continuing ethic from earlier times. It's not something new. It was not invented in the 19th and 20th centuries. It is an undercurrent that continues, and some leaders and thinkers pick it up and others bypass it. Let me give you two recent examples, talking about modern ways of looking at dissent. Two recent examples where I think these ideas of non-violence and up to a point renunciation even became very, very important. One was the famous anti-CAA agitation, Shaheen Bagh. No violence at all. This is what we want. This is what we would like to have, and these are the reasons why this is what we want. That is very, very important. It's not just any old thing. There's a reason for it. And who are we recruiting? We're recruiting people who think like us, who feel like us. And so the anti-CAA movement is not just a movement against the laws on migration and immigration in the northeast of India. They are against patriarchy as well. They are for secularism as well. So you get a sort of larger growing bundle of ideas where what you thought was not dissent, but has become dissent, also comes together in this. And the other great movement, which we haven't really assessed properly enough yet, the protest of the farmers, when they gathered at Delhi. Non-violent, in a way, renunciation, they left their homes and they came and lived in these barbaric old conditions that prevailed at the time. And they kept talking all the time about the fact that they were against the laws for this and this reason. This is what it was doing to society, and that was extremely important. To conclude then, my argument is that dissent is never absent from history, and that is what the book is all about in a way. It's never absent from history. There are some forms of dissent which are crucial to giving shape to what is being discussed at the moment, whatever it may be, wherever it may be. It could be the 5th century BC, it could be 2022. but these ideas are being discussed and dissent is giving some shape to these ideas. We must recognize them as dissenting ideas and we must assess them as to whether or not they are helping our creativity. And our creativity is absolutely essential because it is our creativity that produces the ethics by which we live. That's terribly, terribly important. And let me once again repeat, the importance of dissent is because knowledge moves forward only by questioning existing knowledge. Thank you.
Edition of the original book Voices of Dissent, Shripad Chaudhary of Papyrus and the translator Milind Champanekar come on the stage for launching the book.
I'm loving the unraveling the knot. I'm being anti-unraveling the knot.
Translation was published by Papyrus Publications, very young publication. This is their fourth book. The first one was Pasodi by Nitin Rimde, novel by Prashant Bhagat. The third one was Pivda Pivda Pachoda by Anil Sabre. And this is the fourth book. There are two more planned. You know the meaning of papyrus, the Greek word papyros, popularly used as a paper till 11th century. Even after a millennium, the text written on papyrus is clearly visible and has endured the pressure of time. So that is the philosophy behind this publication. I think papyrus, the idea started with a bookstore, Papyrus the bookstore in Kalyan, and now they have ventured into publication. So their Facebook post reads, "A cabinet of curiosities, a time machine, a treasure trove, a window to the corners of the world, a bookshop." तर त्यांनी आतापर्यंत जेवढी पुस्तकं केली आहेत ते सगळेच प्रयोग आहेत, एक्सपेरिमेंट. शैली, स्टाईल, भाषा, लँग्वेज, विचाराचा गाभा, core essence of thought that has gone into it, the font they have chosen, the layout, and the entire production, the design, the blog, everything is aesthetically very, very of very high quality. So they also say that about 90%, 95% of books in Marathi get only one edition, which is available for readers for next 5 to 10 years, and then they are lost for generations of readers to come. Even Arun Kolatkar's books, if you recall, or deleted books. So Papyrus, under the name of Papyrus Reprints, also aims to bring those books back into print. And another interesting project they are working on, that's a pilot project of mentorship program, where young writers will be identified and mentors will be assigned to guide them throughout the process of writing their book. Best wishes for all these ventures. Milind Champanekar, the translator, will share his views with us now. Milind Champanekar is a Pune-based writer, researcher, editor, playwright, theatre director, translator, and filmmaker. He completed a master's degree in Marathi literature from Mumbai University. He has a number of books and anthologies to his credit, which has won him many awards. He has translated a number of books, including Said Mirza's novel Ami from English into Marathi, which has won him the Sahitya Academy Award for translation in 2017. Milind also worked as a journalist with various leading news dailies like Indian Express, Maharashtra Times, and Lok Satta. He has extensively written on conflict zones such as Kashmir, Chhattisgarh, and the Northeast. So after this, I'll invite Milind to speak. Then we'll have reading of excerpts and then a small Q&A session with the audience. Milind, please.
Honorable Mr. Thaparji, all my friends, let me admit that this is a great moment for me. I had never thought that I would get an opportunity to have shared dais with such a towering personality like Ramila Thapa. So I am very much thankful to Papyrus also for giving me an opportunity to talk about this program and also to give me an opportunity to translate a book. In fact, many of my friends might be knowing that generally I am attached to Rohan Prakashan and I work for them. Most of my books are translated for Rohan Prakashan. But this was certainly an exception because Papyrus, two young boys came and this was really unexpected for me. And they brought this book and Rubila Thapa. So आजकल जो एकदम निराशादायी जो ये है और इसमें some youth is coming and coming out with such a project of voices of dissent, I was really surprised. I couldn't say no to them, so I just said, let me, can I come with the book? Let me go through few pages. I haven't read the book, then I will let you know. So I just read some first 15-20 pages of my भाव का कुछ हाँ कर दूँगा. But later on they came to my place and they said how much time it will take. So तभी मुझे pressure आ गया. तो बोला let me finish reading the book and then I will let you know. When I sit on reading the book, then अभी जो मैडम ने आके बोला कि whether I enjoyed or not, so it was just going to be very painstaking job that I understood. many of the things I had not even thought about or even knew many things because she's master of ancient history and all that, and I was not knowing many terms also how to go about it. So then I had some tentative plan. I spoke to Sripal and Bhushan and all. देखो भाई ये तगड़ी किताब है 1.5 months I will need only to study and do some research, and there are lots of terms and everything I will have to see that, and then within 2 months I will do the translation. So they just looked at each other, they saw that I am very serious about it, they said okay, 3.5 months is fine, no problem. So first job was done. Now let me also tell you being under pressure and being tense, they are two different things. So while translating, I was certainly throughout I was under pressure. That pressure was that I shouldn't misinterpret or distort even a single word or single sentence written by Ramila Thapa, not even through inadvertence. And that was the pressure I was. But my 1.5 months research and this thing helped me to make it bearable. So today I am really tense. So that's a difference. So I am expected to tell about the process of the translation. And many people think you just sit with a dictionary and you translate. And for books like this, it's this thing. But fortunately, whatever books I did, they were research based. Most of the books like maybe Grapes of Wrath or Said Mirza. तो कितना सारा पूरा travel करवा देते दुनिया भर का और अलग-अलग subjects and all that. So that was real first exercise for me. तो उसमें भाषा का जो चेंज पड़ता है while translating, that is really tough job. For some terms you can get the words, but how to structure sentence? और मैं जो जर्नलिज्म का जैसे मैडम ने किया, तो मेरा एक्सपीरियंस ये था जैसे ये इंडियन एक्सप्रेस में कि मैं एक जर्नलिज्म का ये रहता है कि तुम स्ट्रक्चर उसको पिरामिडल करो. उनको जो पहला जो इंट्रो आना चाहिए, जो मोस्ट इम्पोर्टेंट पार्ट यू राइट दैट, और आखिर में जो भी फालतू चीजें हैं वो उधर डाल। तो मैं जो भी इंट्रो करता था और उसका हेडलाइन भी बता देता था, तो वो जो सब एडिटर था ना, उसको कुछ तो कुछ अपनी दिखाने के लिए थी, और वो क्या करता था, उसको उल्टा कर देता था, और मेरा इंट्रो का जो पार्ट था वो नीचे करता। तो देन आई थॉट आई मस्ट बी वेरी स्मार्ट, ये क्या कर रहा है। तो देन व्हेरेवर सम मेजर यूज टू बी देयर ना, मेरा इंट्रो में लास्ट में बॉटम में रखता था, इट वर्क। I got the headlines I wanted. तो इधर मैं ये बोलना चाहता हूँ कि ये तो मैंने जो प्रिपरेशन किया है, उसकी जो लास्ट पार्ट जो था ना, वो आज मैं उल्टा करके पहले बताना चाह रहा हूँ। I had saved it for good concluding, but to tell you, it's a very interesting part. For translation, you must have a good hold over the essence, both the languages, in the concerned languages, original की और ये, और मुझे ऐसा लग रहा है कि मैं जो भी थोड़ा एक्सपेरिमेंट के दर पर कर रहा हूँ, I try to understand the sound, ऐसा। तो सही बिल्डर जी के किताब में जो मुझे साउंड सुनाई दे रहा था, उनकी जो अंग्रेजी थी ना, वो बिल्कुल अलग चीज थी। No, I could understand, you know, some whispering things. तो वो एक्सपेरिमेंट मुझे खबर मैडम, अब मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ कि क्या एक्सपीरियंस है। तो ये साउंड अगर मैं पकड़ा तो मैं सक्सेसफुल हो जाऊंगा। दैट्स व्हाट आई अंडरस्टूड थ्रू दैट एक्सपेरिमेंट फॉर मी रिटर्न टू अ डेमोक्रेटिक मॉडल। तो तब से मुझे ये बुरी आदत पड़ गई कि ग्रेस ऑफ लॉ भी करना है, तो देयर आर लॉट्स ऑफ साउंड्स एंड आई मस्ट गेट दोस साउंड्स। Then of course language and the essence and everything, the character that is this. लेकिन यहाँ पे मैंने ये किया कि कभी भी जो ऑथर है जिसका मैं ट्रांसलेट करूँ, I won't ever meet him before completing the translation. And fortunately, I had hardly 1 or 2 email exchanges with थापर मैडम, और जब भी मैं उनको भेजा तो within 2 hours I used to get response to my queries, so there was no problem. और सही मिर्जा जी को भी मैं बाद में मिला, क्योंकि मेरा ये था कि मैं see when you have to translate from one language to another language, you have to think about the difference about the grammar of this thing. तो एक सेंटेंस लिया उसको किया, ऐसा नहीं होता है। You have to go back पैराग्राफ टू पैराग्राफ, तो उसका सुर आप कैसे करेंगे। और अंग्रेजी तो एक ऐसी कम्युनिक चीज है कि उसमें कॉम्प्लेक्स सेंटेंस लिखे बिना एकेडमिक्स तो बिल्कुल नहीं जा सकते। तो उनका करना क्या, क्योंकि मराठी अपनी जो है ना, उसमें अगर 4 अलग सब क्लॉजेस आ गए ना, तो वो हमारी हिलने लगती है मराठी भाषा। और हमारी भाषा में बिल्कुल हमारी गुरुता ज्यादा नहीं है, वो हम बिल्कुल ऐसे बोलते हैं। जैसी मैडम बोली कि वो बिल्कुल तर्क कठोर बोलती है, मैं बोला मराठी में पुनः में आके सुनो तर्क कठोर क्या होता है। You will feel the music in the voice. तो उसको एक ठीक ठाक करना पड़ता है। तो इसलिए मैं ये देख रहा था, फर्स्ट टाइम आई एम लिसनिंग टू थापर मैडम, और इनकी साउंड मैंने जो विजुअलाइज की थी, जस्ट अंडरस्टैंड विजुअलाइजिंग साउंड, उसके आसपास है, तो मैं थोड़ा, मेरे को पासिंग मार्क दे दिया मानी यही साउंड था, यही रिदम है, यू नो, ऐसे तर्क कठोर, वेरी असर्टिव बट नॉट शाउटिंग एट ऑल, very definite distinction. There are arguments, there are arguments, there are very different style of putting facts, one upon the other. तो मैं बोला ये ठीक, ऐसे ही करना। तो मुझे ट्रांसलेट करते वक्त क्या करना है, जो कॉम्प्लेक्स सेंटेंसेस हो गए उसको पूरा डिसेक्शन करके अलग अलग कर दो, देन पुट इट इन मराठी एज अ रॉ थिंग, उनका जो सुर है उसमें लाना है। उसका सुर लाना है तो उनका एक सिंटैक्स अलग रहेगा अंग्रेजी सेंटेंस का। मराठी लैंग्वेज का मेरा अगर कमांड है I should be able to do that, adjust that syntax. तो then people feel कि no, this is not translation because मैंने वो सुर पकड़ा है, उसका ध्वनि पकड़ा है. So that is not, बोल नहीं सकता ध्वनि क्या पकड़ना है क्या होता है. Maybe because I have a background or something, और मैं कभी भी जो एक्टर था उसको भी मुझे एक्टिंग करके देखो पहले बोल के दिखा बोलता था, मैं ट्वीट करके बैठा था. तो जब तेरे को बोलना आएगा तभी तो एक्टिंग बराबर करेगा. So these are the different things which add to your this thing. तो थापर मैडम के ये किताब में सिर्फ एक बार में रुक गया. सेम पर्सन हुज राइटिंग, ये एक ही पॉइंट है. कभी मैं रुक गया, यहाँ क्या करूँ मैं? क्योंकि there I found very delicate थापर मैडम. You will find it very easy. It's only hardly one page thing, And she has written about her experience about her first meeting with Mahatma Gandhi when she was just 14 years old, if I mistake not. And her language has become so delicate, and so sensitive. मैं बोला अभी क्या करूँ? ये तो पूरा ये दिया है, यहाँ कहाँ बदलूँ? So those are the things, I think I am delirium about. तो उधर में अटक गया. मेरे को भी कुछ एडजस्ट करना पड़ेगा, इसको एडिट करके पहले के सेंटेंसेस में थोड़ा शॉर्ट करके फिर इधर लाओ, उसके वर्ड भी बहुत शॉर्टर जितने भी हो सके वहाँ पे लाया. और I could visualize, how that 14 years old Thapar madam must be doing this thing, and discussing about khadi and this and why not and this. And there also that debating. The major thing is debate. So what my attempt is that you have to judge whether I have succeeded. But that rhythm of debate and very assertive person, that should be throughout this thing. Now the second thing is about terminology. तो कुछ terms है तो उसको मराठी में alternative कुछ मिलना, alternate word मिलना बहुत कठिन हो जाता है. And those which are used in some koshas and they are very Sanskrit प्रत्युर जो बोलते हैं, very Sanskrit है. और हमारी जो मैडम है तो वो पूरा पीपल्स ओरिएंटेड ऐसा इतिहास देखने वाली है, और उसमें मैं संस्कृत वाले वर्ड डालूं तो क्या हो जाएगा. तो वो जो सबलकरण जो है वो वर्ड्स कैसे आए उसके लिए बहुत सारी मेहनत करनी पड़ती है, रात रात में सोचना पड़ती है कि क्या करूं क्या नहीं. तो कुछ वर्ड्स मिल गए, ठीक है, यानी ये कॉमन पैरेलल्स में यूज किए जाते हैं और यहाँ पे जो डिस्कोर्स होता है. लेकिन जहाँ नहीं मिले तो then you have to coin some words which would be acceptable. We have to expect that this would be acceptable. लेकिन ये साउंड वाला चक्कर है, that helps me to take decisions. यार ये जम जाएगा. जैसे बाइनरी करके 50 बार आ रहा है, मैं उसको क्या बोलूँ? तो मैंने बोल दिया द्विक. लेकिन वो तो जिस तरह से वो सेंटेंस में डालोगे तो वो द्विक को पकड़ेगा. द्विक में मेनी बाइनरी, अदरवाइज द्विक. तो वो एक एंजॉयबल जर्नी रहता है, जितना पेनफुल होता है उतना भी एंजॉयबल रहता है when you get those things. And then the structure and the syntax of the thing. कि एक ही सेंटेंस हम इस तरह से बोलते हैं तो अभी मैंने देखा कि मैं शायद अलग सिंटैक्स उनका आवाज सुनने के बाद तो उनका बीच में लिरिकल ये आ जाता है ना. हाँ ऐसे तो मैं बोला ये नहीं पकड़ पाया. सिर्फ वो डेलिकेट 14 इयर्स की वो गर्ल थी ना, उसमें मैं पकड़ा हूँ. लेकिन तो उसका सिंटैक्स भी आपको देखना पड़ेगा. इट शुडंट बी जस्ट अ सिंपल सेंटेंस ऐसा असर्ट करके नहीं होता है कि हाउ ठाकुर मैडम जी would say this thing, how Sayyid or John Steinbeck would say this. There are a lot of different people, so you have to get acquainted with that author through that content only. But you can get that feeling कि ये बंदा बीच में इधर उधर नहीं जाता है. It's very consistent and very strong views and all that reflects in that. So many things are there. She said about dharma, pantha, and I thought that we know what is dharma, we know what is pantha, but when we read her book, then we understand we don't know what is really dharma. There are so many things. She defines it, how it takes shape. There are many rare books like this. Which generally are seen this thing. We hadn't thought about it, or we have thought about it, but this is what the reasoning is. Like pantha का जो ये है, then we know these are pantha, but उनका जो एक placing है इतिहास में, there she takes us, and then we automatically start correlating things. That's her main this thing, just not historian. She helps her correlate for last 3,000, 5,000 years. It takes you for that travel and to correlate it. Few people we have read. Bipin Chandra, we have read Ramchandra Guha, we know everybody's style, how it is different and all that. But this is very rare. She takes us to that journey. She knows that you know Pantha, you know who are Shramana, who are this Jain, who are this Sufi. लेकिन उसका correlation क्या है? तो mainly इस part का ये जो था कि othering का जो ये है, with the other, that is defined excellently in this book, and that's why today it is very much relevant. ये othering का जो है, so I will come to that othering part. क्योंकि महीने पहला मेरा जो एंड था वो अभी तो कंज्यूम कर रहा है. तो what I was saying? Othering. ये जो किताब है, I am not criticizing or anything, but just ये जो है, it's a combination of two speeches, and in the speech you talk differently. Whatever she said now, if she has to sit and write it, she write it a bit differently, although the content is same or something. But these are two speeches, those are combined in one long essay, right? And then the original book, Voices of Dissent, is structured like this: epilogue, one long essay, and prologue, one long essay, and epilogue. So we thought what she has said, she has in those speeches, that is made for some certain audience, which is well versed with the terminology and all. And our Marathi book is supposed to be for a lay reader. So how we would know? So we can think about those terms and all that. लेकिन उसको ये कैसे करना, स्ट्रक्चर कैसे करें, क्योंकि that essay has lots of about 10-12 subheadings. So then I spoke with the publishers. He said, if it's Marathi book and if you want Marathi reader to get attached, so generally I know with Marathi वाला जो ग्राहक रहता है ना, इंडेक्स क्या है, इंडेक्स का है क्या, ऐसा करके वो करता है. तो we must have good index, just not prologue, essay, ना से वो नहीं होने. So there are subheadings, we will convert them into chapters. So with some permission granted into bracket, हमने थोड़ा स्ट्रक्चर उसका किया है, लेकिन कंटेंट को कहीं पे हाथ नहीं लगाया. And of course we had to take that care, nowhere the content is distorted, not even कोई बिल्कुल ज़्यादा enthusiasm नहीं होना. एक वर्ड अड़ा तो 2 दिन रुको, लेकिन no, nothing, because there is so much research and we must respect that. पूरा प्रेशर लेना होता है, वो होता है, थापर मैडम की किताब. तो उसको स्ट्रक्चर हमने इस तरह से किया कि उसमें जो उपोद्घात बोलते हैं और 9 चैप्टर्स है और ये उपसंहार. तो जो 9 चैप्टर्स है उसमें के जो 4 चैप्टर्स है वो उनके पहले स्पीच का पार्ट है और बाकी के 5 जो है उनके सेकंड स्पीच का पार्ट है. तो ऐसा डिसीजन करने के बाद समझता है कि जिसने भी पहले एडिट किया ना उसने क्या क्या लोचा किया होगा. So I was just checking कि you can see those these things. Thapar madam said, now I am going to talk about this. But before that, I am going to tell you something about this. Then I will discuss. This is typical. Typical in the sense that speech में हम ऐसा बोलते ही हैं, but that reflects in the essay book also. So I don't know. What you think? When it is to be converted, can it be thought differently? Because then you get more liberty also. You be happy. Sorry, madam, I am not criticizing. तो उसके जो टॉपिक्स है the one is one speak for the presence of the other, religion and society in early India, and another is renunciation, dissent and satyagraha, about which she spoke of. तो पहले 4 चैप्टर्स अदर्स के बारे में, इसमें जो एक अन्यपणा का ठसा ऐसा करके हमारा चैप्टर है, दैट वाज रियली अ चैलेंजिंग कि हाउ यू डिफाइन अन्य मींस द अदर. तो उसमें अदर में जब कॉमन ले लैंग्वेज में बोलता तो मैं उसको दूसरा बोला, लेकिन अन्य बोला तो मेरा वेट आता है. तो अन्य कौन है? तो आजकल के ज़माने में तो अन्य कौन है बोलने के लिए बहुत आसान चीज़ें हो गई, बहुत सारे एब्यूजिव वर्ड्स हो गए, कहाँ से कितने सारे अदर्स ने क्रिएट हो गए, whether they mean it or not, but for their political purpose they have created it, and then we have to jail it, catch it. So in this we get with a great gravity what that other is. As she said, always when a religion takes with all the institutions, temples and everything, and then it lasts for so many years. Many of us might be thinking, what this religion institution is, which is having such a longer lasting impact. तो इसमें हमको कुछ ऐसे मिलते हैं एक किताब में कि क्यों लोग रिलीजन के साथ रहते हैं, why they get carried away by the religion. And उन पंथ का जो है, ये श्रमण जो बोले हैं, आजीविक बोले हैं, ये they had their type, and that's what she has tried to relate to. And about non-violent discipline, ये अगर नई बात पटी ना तो हम इस तरह से करेंगे. अब का अगर ये ब्लू वाला कुर्ता नहीं चलेगा हमको तो हम ये दूसरा और कोई तो वॉलेट वाला, they will just start doing it. Like I had read about China's cultural revolution. It's a bit of Oriental thing also, Oriental imports. कि कल्चरल रेवोल्यूशन में एक बात उनको पहले ये नहीं थी कि whether we should express it or not. So they had some problems in city, टाउन का जो मैनेजमेंट था. तो एक जन ने जाके एक बोतल अपने फेंस का जो वॉल रहता है उसको एक, and their neighbors they were knowing, उसने अंदाज किया था नेबरिंग इसने एक बोतल रखी, 2 बोतल रखा. So this is way of, then the third one 3 bottles 4 bottles 3 bottles kept on multiplying. तो पूरा लेन में बोतल हो गया. So administration got this thing confused. What happened this? They understood that this must be some protest. So these are just sign language, and this is typical of many great authorities are there on China and that they must be knowing better. लेकिन ये एक्सप्रेस करने की जो बात है तो वो पंथ और इसमें भी बोलते हैं कि आज which I have seen in rural Vidarbha also, very closely. They won't discuss about it. They will express it in some way or the other. और एक इसका किताब थापर मैडम ने भी किया है, और वो गांधी जी की किताब में पढ़ रहा था, उसमें भी वो है कि जो टैक्सेस लगाए थे फार्मर्स पे वो उनको मान्य नहीं थे. तो उन्होंने ये किया कि वो गांव छोड़ के दूसरे गांव में जहाँ रिलेटिव वहाँ पे जाके रहना शुरू किया. एंड दिस वाज ड्यूरिंग अशोका पीरियड और समथिंग. एंड देन द प्रॉब्लम वाज ये if बाय मिस्टेक ना कि पूरा एग्रीकल्चर का प्रॉब्लम होने लगा बिकॉज ऑफ एब्सेंस ऑफ दिस थिंग. सो देन द किंग सेंड सम एम्बेसडर्स एंड negotiated with him. You come back, okay, हम लेसन करेंगे टैक्स को और ये सब करेंगे. So these are the things, you know, there are many things where you have to understand the essence and change the structure of the sentence also. The tone we have to catch, and that's how it is. So I'm concluding now. I've spoken too much as usual. और ये जो इसकी शीर्षक है, इसका लास्ट एंडिंग जो चैप्टर है वहाँ पे बहुत मजा आता है. इसका इतना लंबा चौड़ा जैसे अल्बर्ट पिंटो को गुस्सा क्यों आता है, मेरे ये जो आता है ना, वैसा एक लास्ट इसमें एक जो एपिलॉग जो है, कंक्लूडिंग जो है, तो वो उसने उन्होंने ये किया है, अपील जो है, गत काळातील असहमतीचे आवाज आपल्याला जे सांगू पाहत आहे ते ऐकायला नको का? This is question. This is brings रोंगटे खड़े जाते हैं. और इसके साथ तो इतना स्ट्रगल करना पड़ा बिकॉज ते ऐकायला नको का? Through that question, so mildly ये कर रहा है. And I try to catch that and this thing to take the original. गत काळातील असहमतीचे आवाज आपल्याला जे सांगू पाहत आहे ते आवाज, you see, if you understand those sounds in the past, जे सांगू पाहत आहे ते ऐकायला नको का? So now the responsibility is yours. Understand the situation today, understand what is happening today, and then if you understand that, you might get inspiration. That's the this thing. That's why you have to give that tone. त्यामुळे या पुस्तकाच्या अखेर लेखिकेने आपल्याला हे पुस्तक वाचून गत काळातील असहमतीचे आवाज आपल्याला काय सांगू पाहते त्याचा कानोसा घेण्याचं आवाहन केलं आहे. आज ज्या परिस्थितीतून आपण जात आहोत आणि गेली 8 वर्ष ज्या प्रकारे, दिस इज माय सेंटेन्स, सो आय एम गोइंग टू स्पीक इन मराठी. 8 वर्षे ज्या प्रकारे आयडिया ऑफ इंडियाला तडे पाडण्याचे प्रयत्न केले जात आहेत ते पाहता हे पुस्तक आता येणं ही काळाची गरज होती. दिस वॉज द नीड ऑफ द आवर. आव्हानाला सामोरं जाताना इतिहासाचं आकलन अत्यावश्यक होतंच. आज विरोधी सुरांना अन्य ठरवण्याचे प्रकार दररोज होत आहेत. गेल्या 8 वर्षात आपण अन्याचं सूचन करणारे, विद्वेष व्यक्त करणारे आणि कल्पकता शून्य असे टुकडे टुकडे गँग, अर्बन नक्षल, अँटी नॅशनल, जेहाद या प्रकारचे शब्द ऐकण्यास सरावलेलो आहोत ना. ते शब्द पुरेसे सूचक आहेत. What is situation today? या पुस्तकाच्या रूपाने उपलब्ध होत असलेल्या थापर यांच्या अभ्यासाचा संचित आपल्याला अशा स्थितीला सामोरं जाताना निश्चितच आत्मबल देणारे ठरेल आणि पुढची वाटचाल ठरवण्यासाठी मार्गदर्शन करणारे ठरेल असा मला विश्वास वाटतो. धन्यवाद.
Certainly eager to hear what's written in the original and how it's been translated. So I invite Ameya Mehta. He'll read excerpts from the English book, theatre practitioner. In May he is launching a new play. Ameya, please.
Dissent necessary. Dissent is, in a sense, the disagreement that a person or persons may have with others, or more publicly with some of the institutions that govern the patterns of life. People have disagreed since time immemorial. They have argued or agreed to disagree or eventually arrived at an agreement. This is all part of life, of living. Most institutions that have an influence on our daily life tend to have long histories. Many have evolved in variant ways, and we are only now beginning to recognize that the questioning of how they function is not as recent as an activity as we were imagining it to be. In fact, it has been practiced for centuries. Dissent is part of a larger body of varieties of differences that arise out of questioning and critical inquiry, or just by giving vent to another experience. In writing about it, I am not downgrading other forms, but trying to look more closely at those that we have neglected in our construction of the past and its culture, that which we claim to have inherited and which we acclaim in present times. Given that we continue to construct the past, the concepts we use to do so are also undergoing a similar construction. In order to explore these, it is necessary to take up leads old and new. A fuller investigation of dissent would have to examine situations where the dissent leads to protest, violent and non-violent. My intention, however, is to make audible, symbolically, the voices of non-violent dissent. Dissent is not a modern concept, but recognizing it in its various forms is new. As is the fact that in a truly liberal, democratic society, such questioning is not frowned upon, but rather encouraged and explored to discussion. The right to question is now public, open, and can be exercised by any citizen. Earlier, only the powerful had this right, but today it extends, in theory at least, to all citizens. In earlier times, the right was often argued over, but did not always become a public issue as it can in our times. This, in part, places a responsibility on us to recognize and understand the centrality of dissent. Implicit in having these rights is the exercising of dissent which we think is appropriate. This has a historical continuity, even if the forms have altered. I would like to explore the continuity through a few examples. There should always be, invariably, in every modern society, the right of the citizen to dissent as part of the right to free speech. This right has been contentious yet crucial to the continuity of societies. However much we may wish otherwise, Indian society, as indeed every other society, has not been a seamless, harmonious entity with little or no contradictions. We too have had our share of intolerance and violence and the clash of ideas. Dissenting voices have been many, and have had a much wider articulation in the past than we are willing to concede. In historical terms, social relationships were encapsulated, as they often still are, in the binaries of those who had power and ownership, be it of land, property, ritual, or whatever gives power, and those who did not. We know this relationship through conjugations such as Raja and Praja, the feudal lord and serf, the factory owner and the employee, the colonizer and colonial subject. A couple of centuries ago, this gave way through an overwhelming historical change to a society that speaks of industrialization, capitalism, the middle class control of new technology, the workers who provide the labor, the peasants on whom agricultural productions depend, and such like. One of the factors that was intended to bind this new society together was nationalism, or the sense of people belonging to one nation, therefore nationhood. The massive change implicit in this, it is assumed, would be the evolving of a different relationship that determines the functioning of society. In the functioning of a nation, what matters is the relationship between the people as citizens and what they have created jointly, the state. The right of the citizen vis-a-vis the state have therefore moved center stage. This historical phase also marks an alteration in the forms of governance. The earlier kingship is replaced by the emergence of democracies. Democracies can only be secular since every citizen has equal status. Their institutions have representatives from all sections of society, each having rights of equal status. This helps to integrate the secular, the democratic, and the national. Thank you.
I request Dhanashree Khatkar to read excerpts in Marathi. Dhanashree is also a theatre artist, and her recent project is Dastangoy, along with Akshay Shimpi on City of Mumbai. You'll get an opportunity to listen to that Dastangoy in the same auditorium, maybe in August or September.
नमस्कार. असहमतीचे आवाज या पुस्तकातील काही अंश आपल्या समोर वाचते. उपसंहार. गतकाळातील असहमतीचे आवाज आज आपल्याला जे सांगू पाहत आहेत ते ऐकायला नको का? मी असं दर्शवून देण्याचा प्रयत्न केला आहे की असहमती, विरोध, मतभेद अशा सर्व गोष्टी भूतकाळात केवळ अस्तित्वात होत्या असं नाही, तर तात्कालीन विचार आणि आचरण यांच्याशी त्यांची आंतरक्रियाही होती आणि त्यायोगे नव्या परिभाषा निर्माण करण्यात त्यांनी योगदान केलं होतं. आपण आज जिला भारतीय सभ्यता संस्कृती म्हणतो, तिच्या घडणीत अशा परिभाषा अत्यंत महत्त्वाच्या ठरल्या आणि त्याचप्रमाणे विविध जीवनशैलींच्या नमुनेदार रचना, विविध संस्कृती किंवा तुम्ही त्याला जे काही म्हणत असाल ते घडण्याच्या दृष्टीने महत्त्वाच्या ठरल्या. भूतकाळातील व आजच्या काळातही अन्य आणि स्व यांच्या भोवती घुटमळत राहिलेल्या वादसंवादांची परिणिती काय झाली ते समजून घेण्याच्या दृष्टीने असहमतीचे आकृतिबंध ओळखणं आणि त्यांची समाजासोबतची आंतरक्रिया जाणून घेणं हे अत्यावश्यक आहे. त्याचप्रमाणे इतर गोष्टींसाठी अत्यावश्यक आहे, जसं की पुराणमतवाद आणि असहमती यांच्या बाबतीत बोलण्यासाठी आपण वर्तमानाकडे कसं पाहत आहोत ते आणि त्यातून कसं भविष्य सूचित होतं ते समजून घेण्यास आपल्याला प्रोत्साहित करण्यासाठी लोकशाही, धर्मनिरपेक्ष समाज आणि सर्वाधिक महत्त्वाचं म्हणजे न्यायावर आधारित समाज प्रस्तावित करण्यासाठीच्या प्रयत्नांची जी राजकीय मुळं आहेत त्यांना विधिग्राह्य ठरवण्यासाठी. मी असा युक्तिवाद करण्याचा प्रयत्न केला आहे की पूर्वीच्या काळी असहमती नेहमीच नाही तरी अनेक वेळा परित्यागाच्या विविध आकृतिबंधांच्या माध्यमातून किंवा पर्यायी संदेश देणाऱ्या वेगळ्या पंथाची स्थापना करून अभिव्यक्त केली गेली. आधुनिक पूर्व काळात असहमती वारंवार धार्मिक परिभाषेत व्यक्त केली गेली, कारण ती परिभाषा सहज ओळखीची ठरत होती आणि तिची एक सामाजिक पोहोचही होती. आपण त्यातला केवळ धार्मिक संदेश वाचायला नाही, तर त्यातून व्यापक संदर्भात काय सूचित करणं इच्छित होतं ते देखील समजून घ्यायला शिकलं पाहिजे. आधुनिक काळाने अशा राष्ट्रवादाचं आगमन अनुभवलेलं आहे की ज्या योगे समाजातील मूलभूत घटकांमध्ये बदल संभवलेले आहेत. जरी असहमतीचे मार्ग ओळखीचे असले किंवा त्यांनी नवे आकृतिबंधही धारण केले असतील, तरी देखील अपरिहार्यपणे आज असहमती नव्या आकांक्षा व्यक्त करते. राष्ट्र राज्याची कल्पना अस्तित्वात येणं, स्वायत्तेसाठी तिने संघर्ष करणं आणि गुलाम, दास, वेठबिगार, प्रजा अशा ओळखी बदलून त्यांची जागा पूर्ण हक्क प्राप्त असलेल्या मुक्त नागरिकांनी घेणं, अशा गोष्टींमुळे असहमती वर्तमान आणि भविष्याबद्दलची नवी दृष्टी प्रदान करते. असहमतीचे विचार आता धार्मिक परिभाषेत व्यक्त करण्याची गरज उरलेली नाहीये आणि आता ते विचार नागरी समाजाच्या परिभाषेत व्यक्त करणं शक्य झालेलं आहे आणि नागरिकांचे हक्क हाच आज महत्त्वाचा विषय ठरलेला आहे. हे सगळं जे ऐतिहासिक स्वरूपांतर झालेलं आहे ते राज्य करणाऱ्यांनी आणि ज्यांच्यावर राज्य केलं जात आहे त्यांनी अशा दोघांनी समजून घेतलं पाहिजे, ओळखलं पाहिजे आणि त्याचं महत्त्व समजून घेतलं पाहिजे. असहमतीच्या जुन्या मार्गांना गेल्या शतकात ज्याप्रमाणे अगदी पटकनच मान्यता मिळालेली आहे ते पाहता असहमती अजूनही काही जुने मार्ग चोखाळू शकते असं स्पष्टच दिसून येतं. परंतु अर्थातच बदललेले संदर्भ लक्षात घेता नवे मार्गही तिने सुरू केलेच पाहिजे. असहमती व्यक्त करणाऱ्या विरोधी विचारांची अपेक्षा ठेवणं आणि स्वीकारणं आणि त्याबाबत चर्चा करणं हे आता आपण शिकून घ्यायला पाहिजे. त्या आवाजाला दडपून टाकणं नाही. आजच्या काळात असहमतीचे विचार सर्वांच्या कानावर जातील अशा स्वरूपात असणं, वेगळे उठून दिसण्यायोग्य आणि सुस्पष्ट असणं हे आवश्यक ठरतं आणि ते अन्यायाविरोधात असायला हवे आणि लोकशाही हक्कांच्या समर्थनार्थ असायला हवे. असहमती स्पष्टतेने अभिव्यक्त करण्याचा अर्थ हिंसक क्रांती करणं असा होत नाही. अस्वस्थ करणाऱ्या प्रश्नांची उत्तरं मिळवण्यासाठी असहमती व्यक्त करणं आणि त्यासाठी एक सुसंस्कृत चर्चा विश्व असणं हे अत्यावश्यकच असतं. जसे काही जण युक्तिवाद करतात किंवा करत आलेले आहेत, त्यानुसार असहमतीचे जे आकृतिबंध आहेत ते पाश्चात्यांकडून भारतीय विचारांमध्ये आयात केले गेलेले नाहीयेत. जे तसा युक्तिवाद करतात त्यांची समाजातील असहमतीतून काय सूचित होतं याचा वेध घेण्याची इच्छाच नसते. त्याचप्रमाणे असहमती केवळ बुद्धिप्रामाण्यवाद्यांच्याच पाठीवर स्वार होऊन पुढे येत असते असे नाहीये. विचार करण्याचे भिन्न विभिन्न मार्ग आणि अनेकविध जीवनानुभव यांच्यातून कल्पनांची जी बहुविविधता निर्माण होत असते, त्या बहुविविधतेत असहमतीची मुळं सामावलेली असतात. भारतीय तत्वज्ञानाच्या परंपरेतील अनेक वादविवादांपासून ते लोकांमध्ये मिसळून जगण्यायोग्य जीवन मार्ग त्यांच्या मतीने जाणून घेऊन त्याबाबत उपदेश करणं असा एक खूप मोठा पट ज्यातून बहुविविध कल्पना निष्पन्न झालेल्या आहेत. माझे विचार स्पष्ट करून सांगण्यासाठी मी 3 उदाहरणं दिलेली आहेत. तिन्हींमध्ये एका सहस्त्रकांचं अंतर आहे आणि त्यातील प्रत्येकाचं उदाहरण सुरुवातीला अन्यच्या वर्गवारीत असल्याचं दर्शवलेलं आहे. तसं पाहिलं तर ते असहमतीचं केंद्र ठरले होते. पहिल्या उदाहरणात साधासा दुहेरीपणा होता, तर दुसऱ्या आणि तिसऱ्या उदाहरणात परस्पर विसंगती होती आणि अन्यपणाचे पदर होते आणि त्यांचे आविष्कार हे स्वचे विचार मांडणारे होते. असे जे अनेकविध होते त्यांच्या संबंधित होते. त्यात बदलत जाणारे ऐतिहासिक संदर्भ आधीच्या काळापेक्षा ते वेगळे कसे होते ते आपल्याला लक्षात घ्यावं लागतं. काही कल्पनांना विरोध झाला आणि त्या अमान्य केल्या गेल्या, तर काही कल्पनांचा वर्चस्व असलेल्या समाजाकडून त्यांच्या विचारांमध्ये अंतर्भाव केला गेला आणि काहींना आणखी काही सान्निध्यात राहू शकतील असे पंथ मारून सामावून घेतलं गेलं, अर्थात त्यांची इच्छा असो वा नसो. अशा सर्व प्रक्रियेच्या परिणाम स्वरूप कशा प्रकारचे सामाजिक नातेसंबंध तयार झाले असतील ते आपण जाणून घेणं अतिशय आवश्यक आहे. धन्यवाद.
Session question and answers. There is a mic. Please raise your hand.
Questions for you, Professor Thapa. Voicing dissent can be very exhausting. So how does one find renewal and replenishment? Could you talk about examples from your own life?
I'm not exhausted. It's a question of deciding that dissent means something to you, that your life is concerned with articulating that dissent. And so if you go on doing it, yes, there are moments where you say, oh, I can't carry on, I've been doing it. I mean, there are certain historical questions, for example, that get asked to me in public, and I think, oh, I've been answering this question for 40 years. Don't people listen? Why are they going on answering? But the point is that what keeps you going all the time is the fact that there's always someone there who still wants to go. And you can, repeat the answer, and then there's somebody else who says, oh, I never thought of it that way. Or someone else who says, oh, she's been saying this for 40 years, forget it, it's unimportant. Whatever it is, it's a fight. I agree with you. It is a fight, it is exhausting. But I think that once you decide to dissent on certain issues, you really have to just carry on until that issue is sorted out, one way or the other. I don't think that you can give up halfway and say, I'm tired. I wish I could, I'm afraid I can't. And you have to.
Thank you so much.
I would like to ask a question on the concept of renunciation. Now, as a student of Hindu law, I have read a little bit about it. And what I found in the law, and I'm referring to the Shastric texts, the renunciator considers himself dead to the world, in the sense that they even perform their last rites themselves. Now, if this is the position in Hindu law, I would like to know whether there's any precedent for a renunciator of this kind being in, say, political public life. Are there any precedents for this? I have not been able to find an answer to this question.
One almost wishes there were some, because if they have to perform their death rites, it would be quite useful to have even politicians doing that. Anyway, sorry, I'm being facetious. The problem is the confusion between renunciation and asceticism. You're talking about the sannyasi. That's not a renouncer. The sannyasi is an ascetic. The renouncer is the bhikkhu and the sadhu and the yogi and all these categories that I referred to. Now, the ascetic, yes, the ascetic says, I'm opting out of family, society, everything. I'm going to live by myself and die quietly, doing my own thing. His last rites are performed and he leaves. He's not heard of after that. The renouncer, on the other hand, says, I am joining an alternative society, which is the society of the monastery, or taking up the dharma, the buddha, or of the Jains and so on. I'm joining that alternative society because I think that society has a solution to the problems of the individual and other people as well. So I think that distinction has to be made. Now the Brahmanical texts are talking about the sannyasi. They're not talking about the bhikkhu because they give no legitimacy to the bhikkhu or to the sadhu or the yogi. You know, these characters are not part of the Brahmanical tradition. They're separate. And I think this is something that we must understand and keep in mind, that we are dealing with two or more separate traditions. We're not dealing with just the one tradition. And that we cannot generalize from the Brahmanical texts and say that this applies to everybody. It only applies to a very small category of people. So in a sense, there isn't a dilemma, because the ascetic is very different from the renouncer.
Hello, this is Utkasha. Thank you for waking us all out of intellectual complacency, because the popular culture teaches us to agree to the power, agree to the popular trends, and it is really nice to see someone of influence who is descending and at the same time deviating from the convention of agreement. So my question is that I've been giving attentive ear to your talk, and your theory of presenting dissent in a civilized manner intrigues me a lot. But at the same time, I want to ask you, how can we make it practical? Or in other words, we are in a classroom and teacher is giving a lecture, but as a student, we want to counter our teacher and she's going to give me marks. So how do I do it without offending her?
Take a deep breath and do it. It's got to be done. You know, I agree. It's a terrible problem.
Yes.
It's a question of marks. You feel better keep quiet and just not say anything. But you know, there are quiet ways in which you can do the countering. You don't have to do a front, sort of face-to-face, one-to-one. I disagree with you. There are ways which you go around in circles and try and get the teacher caught in the trap that the teacher is making by saying that there is no dissent, or should be no dissent. In other words, what I'm saying is that you have to pay much more attention to how you frame your disagreement and your question. Sometimes dissent can be frontal and very effective. If you say, no, I'm sorry, I just don't agree with you. Sometimes it's better to do it in a roundabout way and get the person to realize the contradiction in what they're saying. And that's a very important part of dissent. That very often what happens is that the people that are holding forth whom you're disagreeing with may take a position of, I'm right because you know this, this and this. Now, if you can prove that this, and this are contradictory in themselves, then you question the way in which that argument is presented. So what I'm trying to suggest is that it's not an easy thing to dissent. You don't just say, no, I disagree, and that's it. There are many ways, and there are many subtle ways in which you have to do the dissenting in order to make the point that you don't lose marks and you still have a position.
I graduated and I'm a journalist now. However, I still continue to brood over my college memories. So, thank you for your answer.
You know, in today's time, you have dissent from, like, Twitter is a form of dissent in a way, like everybody is up there. Exactly. And how do we really create this concept of dialogue? Because what you are saying is the traditional dialogue where you allow to really recognize the other person's position. But today that space doesn't exist. So is there anything that you see experiments being done? I mean, all of us are doing small things. Are there any hope at that level to engage people in dialogue in current times?
Well, I think, I don't know, I'm not on Twitter and Facebook and all the rest of it, so I'm afraid I cheat, I keep away from all of that. My answer would be that you have to keep persisting in the same way as there are trolls who abuse you when you say something, and they go on and on and on for years, and you know that every time you make a public statement, there is going to be a batch of 39 trolls who will come after you and abuse you. Now, you either say, I give up, or else you say, no, all right, let them say what they like, I will still maintain my position. Now, the point is that it's a tough fight when you're the minority. It's a very tough fight, but you can't give up. You have to go on insisting and saying, please look at it my way, politely. I'm telling you that this doesn't hold true, and these are my reasons. Please look at it my way. And the next 3 days later, when you get an attack, you reply with the same answer. And you go on saying, you've got to look at it in this way. So it's a question of really, at one point it's a question of patience and persistence. But at another point, yes, you have to be a little aggressive as well. Not wildly aggressive, a little aggression.
Any other comments? At the back.
Good evening, ma'am. Thank you for an outstanding session. Myself, Deepak. And you have said that dissenting is devoid of violence, but violence is unnecessary outcome of dissent. So how to stay away from violence, because it is from the state or a mob or an organized form in different manners. So it is, in a way, is a dissent is become a privileged thing. Those who are privileged can only a dissent.
No, a dissent is, in very often, it's the prehistory of an argument. It's what you begin with, and you try it out as a technique in terms of disagreement, you express your disagreement, you have an argument, you have a dialogue, you have a discussion. The next step may be protest. And even then, how do you protest? Do you protest violently straight away? Or do you protest in other means? What I'm trying to suggest is that the notion of not agreeing doesn't have a single definition. It has degrees of not agreeing, which go from non-violence, verbal dialogue, to gradually more articulated violence till you come to absolute violence. Now, the point about non-violence is that you argue that you will not use any kind of physical violence that will harm the other person. That's very often the definition. Non-violence means you do not physically harm the other person. You may harm the other person by the abuse of language you use. That's another matter. That doesn't come under violence and non-violence. But the beginnings of this are what we call dissent, disagreement. As it becomes greater and moves into violence, it ceases to be dissent. It then becomes violent protest, which is a different thing from dissent. And my argument is that dissent is absolutely legitimate. You cannot say that there can't be dissent. On the other hand, violence is debatable. Is it legitimate? Is it not? That's a debatable issue.
Always it is challenged by the post-truth society as well as whataboutery, and dissent always becomes theme in front of the fact checks and many aspects of so the opposition always try to dilute the dissent by various means. So you need to be either in more in number or always a collective voice. So that is.
Yeah, but I think that we should have a much more nuanced understanding of what opposition means. You can't describe everything as dissent, and you can't describe everything as protest. You have to know, you have to make a distinction, and you have to know what applies where and what you're doing and how you're describing what you're doing. That's important. And you can object and say that this is no longer dissent, this is something else, and I have no party of this. I won't have anything to do with it. That is also a possible way. But you have to be very aware of the point where you've reached along this line of from dissent to violent protest. It's not a continuous line, but it's a direction, and you have to know exactly how far you're willing to go and where you will stop.
My question to the translator. Sir, you have translated the book and I'm yet to read that. But I want to ask you, when you are in the middle of translating the book, many a times you may find yourself not agreeing with the author. So that time, do you twist in such a way which suits you, or you want to go with the author?
The moment I do that, I say to be a translator.
No, it's
I don't even right to express my dissent. So, if I don't agree with the author.
How do you save yourself from that natural decline?
No, I
अंदर रख दो लेकिन जो बराबर कर दो.
that is why it's important for the translator to be a good reader, first of all, before he chooses the book. So, and we have an experienced translator here. Yeah, next question, please.
I just wanted to talk about two unusual aspects of today's. One is Romila Thapar, who's an eminent historian, writing on dissent. In the sense, it's linking a political issue which is very relevant to society today with linking it to history, which I think is something that makes one think. And secondly, for a publication like Papyrus to pick up this book for translation into Marathi, which I think is also equally commendable, because in today's times, these are books which need to be read, and it tends to be only in the English speaking domain. So the fact that it's been translated into Marathi will really make it accessible to.
You actually gave the lead to the next person who wants to say thank you to Naveen Kishore, who approached the Goethe Institute for recommendation of publication for Marathi translation, and then we got in touch with Papyrus. So Shripad wants to say thank you.